All right, guys, I want to welcome you back to another episode of Thursday Night Live. This is Season 2, Episode 2. So welcome to everybody who's here. We see some new faces. It's awesome to see you guys. And our usual regulars, we're happy to have you here too. Good, glad you're here. Just a couple of announcements before we get rolling today. Don't forget, tip your bartender. She's working hard to keep us well hydrated. We want to thank Carabao Craft Brewery again for allowing us to be here tonight. I'm always thankful that this is a space we're able to use. Also, I want to remind you about our guide school. Our dates are up on our website, so if you want to take a peek at those, if it's something that interests you, don't hesitate to ask a question about it if it's something you're interested in, okay? Also, we want to thank, there were some donations that came in last week, which were more than covered the material for last week, so we're very thankful for all that. Every little bit counts, so we're thankful for that. Thanks, guys. Other than that, this week we're going to continue on with our second week themed kind of in swinging flies. So last week we did a couple flies that were just some smaller streamers that we would maybe swing here in the winter on the bow. This week we're going to do a couple, we're going to get into a little bit bigger fly on one of them, kind of a really standard looking intruder fly, just to kind of teach some of the basics of how you can tie some even bigger ones, whether you're going for like big salmon or steelhead. And then this is a little bit of an oversized version of soft Hackle Spey. But it's one of my versions of it and thought I'd show it to you. It's a little bit easier to get used to it on a little bigger fly, and then you can translate it down. When it comes to fishing Spey technique, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to do it with a two-handed rod. You can swing with a single-handed rod just the same. All it's really meaning is we're slowing down the pace that fly is moving through the water. We're not stripping it back to ourselves mostly. We're just letting it hit a swing and ticking hopefully pretty close to the bottom, and if it bumps in front of a fish's face, hopefully it's going to pick it up. So a lot of times with especially on the bow, trout Spey is becoming a little more popular. But most people think when they're hucking flies, Spey fishing for trout, that they need to be heavy, getting right down. We can do that with the weight on the line versus maybe necessarily the fly. So sometimes we're using a lot lighter flies. Just these soft hackles are what people are swinging on a trout Spey that's maybe a 3 or 4 weight. A lot lighter fly for a lot lighter rod. So we're going to take you through a couple. We're going to do one more set next week and show you a couple more swinging flies for that as well. Okay, so why don't we get started? We're going to start with this guy that I have up here on the vise right now. If you look into your packages, we're going to start with the one that's got the chenille in it that's kind of coffee colored. So a little package, it's got 2 single hooks. So for our flies today, there's enough material to tie 2 of these and then enough material to tie 1 of these, okay? So if you go into your material package, you want to open up the little baggie that's got the kind of the coffee colored chenille in it. It's going to have a couple of curved hooks, which I just dropped. So I've got a couple of curved hooks in there. So I want you to go ahead and put one of those hooks in your vise. What I'm using for thread today, I'm either using a 70 denier or a 140. This first fly, a 70 is nice because it's not as bulky. When you're tying in hackle feathers or smaller feathers. And then on our next one, when I do these bigger intruders, I normally use a 140, but I'm gonna use black for both. You could use brown or a color that matches the fly. So go ahead and get that in your vise. Then we're just going to take our thread and get it started behind the eye of the hook, and we're going to lay down a nice thread base all the way back to the bend and go a little ways down the bend as well. So once you've got that thread on there, just lay down a nice layer. And then we're going to bring our thread back up to just behind the eye. You're going to notice in that package you had just a nice thin piece of copper, this size BR copper wire. That's their first material we're going to start on the shank of the hook. Okay, so right behind the eye of the hook, we're going to take that wire. We're just going to get it secured with a couple wraps. Make sure that the tip of it's nice and buried with some thread, and then we're just going to work that back. And this one, on this curved hook, we want to have the body of this, once we put the chenille on, to look like that kind of the butt of the fly is hanging down a little bit. So you want to take that wire right down into the bend of the hook, okay? So nice and deep. I'm quite a ways down in there. Then we're going to bring that thread one more time back up to the eye. Next piece of material we're going to grab when you're just getting ready for it is that chenille that I gave you there. So when tying in this chenille, it's kind of, everything's secured with that middle piece of the chenille. There's like a thread that runs through the middle. So when we're getting ready to tie it in, all we can do is reach in there and just pinch those last bit of fibers. If you pull them out, you can pull a little bit and it exposes that little bit of thread. And that thread is what we actually want to tie in. If we tied it on the fluffy stuff, as you can see here, it kind of just goes everywhere, it could slip out. So we want to be tying in that thread that runs right through the middle of it. So again, go ahead and take that. We want to tie in that little white piece of thread that's in the middle. We're going to keep that material right on top of the hook shank, just some nice open spirals as we go back and down, and then take that right into the hook bend right where you finish with that copper wire. Then we'll take and bring our thread back forward. We're going to leave ourselves a little bit of space behind the eye of the hook, so maybe like one hook eye length back is where we'll leave our thread. So we're tying this fly, we're tying unweighted, and kind of for the purpose I explained. Sometimes when we're swinging flies, we're going to use weight on our line and not necessarily the fly. So this can get down really nice and quick if you have an intermediate sink tip on or something like that. But also recognize we could put a bead on the front of this fly, or we could even put some lead wire underneath or lead-free wire underneath. That could build up some bulk and also just give you a little bit of weight. But this version tonight, we're going to tie unweighted. Okay, so next thing we're going to do, we're going to take that chenille that we have, and we're just going to do touching wraps and go all the way up the hook shank. Making sure that when you get up to the eye that you leave that one hook eye length, so you want a little bit of space up there because we're going to be tying in a couple of feathers up at the front. So even if you over exaggerate that space a little bit, I'll take it to right there. So I've left probably at least 2 hook eye lengths. Take a wrap over top of it and secure it. Once behind, once in front. Once you know it's good and secure, you can go ahead and reach in and snip it out. And I just take a few thread wraps just to clean that up. So that just gives us there's a lot of ways to build bodies out of different materials, but this is a real simple one that just gives you a buggy looking body. That fur is going to move in the water. That coffee color gives it a little bit of variation in color. What we're going to do then is we're going to take that copper wire that we have in there, and we're just going to open spiral that right back up to where we locked in that chenille, and we're going to tie it down as well. So just nice open spiral. And really the only purpose of this, it does give it a little bit of, flash in the body, but more than anything, it's durability, so that chenille is not going to come out, and it does segment it a little bit. So then we'll go ahead and secure that in up top. So for all you guys viewing at home, don't hesitate if you have any questions for us, just type them in. We'll do our best to answer them as we go. Same with you guys here. Don't hesitate to slow me down or stop me if you need something clarified. And if you feel like you're deficient on a material or you don't have something that I've said, it is possible that it was missed. So just let me know and I can get it to you. Okay. So now if you go into the smaller package that I told you to go into, you're going to have a couple of these mallard flanks. So you might have either a gray one so mine's gray. You might have a little bit lighter colored white one. Not too critical on which color you use here. You can vary that quite a bit, but I would stick closer to the light side, the grays or the whites. And when we tie this in and you can see how it's got all that barring down the feather. Once we tie that in, that's all going to spread open. It's going to look really nice, give us a whole bunch of variation in the fly. You can see the speckles as it moves back into it. So this is the next one we're going to use. And when you're going through a bag of mallard flank, it's kind of like marabou. You can probably use about 10% of what's in here to be an effective material. So sometimes you got to do a little bit of digging to find the right one. When you look into a feather like this, if you grab the tips and you pull down on the fibers, it pulls those fibers back and you can see the length of them. So when you look at your fly, you want to compare that. So you know what, if I lay the length of that on there, I can see, okay, well, when I tie that in, it's going to hang just beyond the fly. That's good. The next material we put in is that pheasant rump, and the feathers, or the fibers, are quite a bit longer, so they hang out even beyond that. So what this material here is going to do, and it's kind of going to translate into the intruder we do, is we're always wanting to prop things up a bit. We don't want it to slick right tight back on that body, because then our profile goes super small. It doesn't look like it's as bolsterous as it could be. So by putting a feather like this on that's got a little bit of spring to it, it'll hold up some of the materials that we put on top. Okay, so it gives it a little bit different look. So what I want you to do is I want you to grab this feather right from the very tips. So you gotta kind of get your fingers in there and start spreading the feathers down so you expose basically just the tip of the feather so we can use the rest of the fibers. So it can be a little bit of messing around to find it. And if you do what I just did, sometimes that feather will actually peel off one side, which is not what we want. So we'll have to grab another one. Try to find a good one. Try that again. So we're just gonna pull those down, expose just the head of the fly, or head of the feather, sorry. And if you notice when you're looking at that feather, it's got a concave side and a top side. So thinking that when we tie in this feather, we want that curve to be always moving to the back. So if you think of when we start wrapping this forward, if we were to tie it in this way, all those fibers are concave this way and will be pointing forward down the hook shank. We want them to point rearward as we wrap, okay? So if I hold this feather here, you can see that those fibers are pointing rearward down the fly. That's how I want to tie them in. So once I've exposed basically right down to the stem, now I'm going to take it like so, lay it down knowing the fibers are pointed backwards. I'm going to take a good securing wrap on it. I'm going to take a couple more because I don't want that to go anywhere. And I'm actually going to wrap up the hook shank a little bit and then come back, because I really don't want that to move once I start wrapping it. And then you can just snip out the tip that you tied in. And you want to advance your thread so that when your first wraps start happening, it's right up against that chenille. So I've taken my thread and I've advanced it right up to there, so I know that I've got thread wraps right up to it, and then I can bring my thread back down towards the eye. Still trying to maintain maybe that one hook eye length back. So at this point, depending on how your dexterity is, you may want to use hackle pliers. I normally don't. This feather's got decent size to it, so you can just use your fingers. You want to sort of stroke out those feathers so they start to spread out a bit, so that when we wrap them up the hook shank, they've spread out. So I can see there that they're all pointed rearward. Now I'm just going to start taking wraps. And you're holding that stem nice and firm, so you'll notice that right away these fibers start separating and they don't really want to head the way you want them to. So I'm going to reach in there and I'm going to start stroking them rearwards as I go. So I want those to stay back. We want to do nice touching wraps. Keep stroking those feathers rearward as you go, those fibers, and trying to maintain that shape. And once you get down to where the fluff on the feather starts, that's when you want to tie it off. We don't want to use any of that fluff. Just want those nice long fibers. So then take a nice wrap through the feather, make sure it's locked in, take some wraps in front of it, and then you can snip out that stem. You're going to see I got some rogue feathers going there too that aren't really where they're supposed to be. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take them, stroke them back so they're headed rearward, and I'm just going to put some thread wraps over top of them, and that's going to bind them back. So now they're back pointed rearward again, like so. And you're going to kind of want to get in there and use your thumb and move them around and try to get those fibers to spread out. How's it going?
Oh, she follows direction really well.
Oh, yeah. So I'm going to go down and just clean up my head one more time. You kind of want to make sure that you've got equal amount of fibers going on one side of the hook as you do the other. Good. Should look something like that at this point. So as you can see, those feathers don't want to lay nice and flat. Hey man, how are you? They're not going to lay really flat like marabou would or something like that. It's got a little bit of puff to it. It's going to hold up what we put on top of it. It looks good, Red. You're what? You like tying flies? So once you got that good and secure, I'll give you a second to get there. The next feather we're going to be looking for is that pheasant rump. So if you're curious what that's looking like, it's this guy here. It's got those quite a bit of fluff, but those really nice long fibers at the top. Yeah, that one right there. That's the right one. So then once you get to this point, guys, on this feather, I like to clean this one up a bit before I put it in. It's a little easier to hold, and then I can really tell what fibers I want to actually get on the hook. So I'm going to hold up top here. I'm going to hold on here, and I'm going to peel off that fluff instead of the side. So you'll notice if you get a good grip on it and pull, that fluff will actually stay on the top part of the stem, and it actually just peels off a layer, and it comes off nice and clean, just like that. Any feather that we can do this to will act the same. You start to peel, and as you can see right there, I can just keep pulling, and it just pulls that little piece of the stem right off. And then now what I have to work with is just a nice clean feather. And if you take a second and look into the pheasant rump, it's actually a really, we don't really use it much outside of more of these, not even soft hackle because it's way too big for that, but we use it in a lot of traditional salmon flies, traditional steelhead flies. They use this feather. It's got really long, thin fibers, so when you wrap it up a stem, some people are like, it actually looks like maybe somebody tied each tiny fiber into a fly, but it's a really interesting feather to work with because you can quite easily just wrap this up the hook shank, and you're going to get a nice long fibers all going the way you want them to. And if you look at your feather, you can tell they're not all the same length. They kind of go up, some are shorter. So you got a nice variety of length and what almost looks like a tapered look on the fly when it's done. So we're going to do exactly what we did with the last feather. So we're going to come up to the top, and we're going to try to get back at that tip and pull the other fibers down. This one's a little trickier because it's longer fibers. But we want to pull those fibers down without tearing any fibers out because we want to use all of them. So once you got it kind of pulled down, it'll expose it like that. And now we're going to take that tip, and you're going to notice on this feather it has that same concave on one side. We want those fibers to point rearward again. So we're going to do exactly the same thing we did with the mallard flank. We're going to come back up right to where our mallard flank ended, and we're going to tie this in nice and tight right there. Get a good couple wraps in on it so it's not going anywhere. So again, every material we tie in, we want to tie it in with a couple wraps, and we want to go behind that material and tie in a couple more wraps so it's not going to go anywhere. And then we're going to leave our thread just right up at the eye. Yes. Is he watching right now? That's awesome. So Adrian, who comes here every night, it looks like his baby was born, Xavier. So I want to congratulate him, but he's still tuning in, baby and everything laying there on mom. That's pretty brave. Okay, so once we got that feather tied in, we're going to do the same thing, guys. We're going to take as many wraps as we can get without crowding that eye so bad that we can't tie it off. So I'm going to take it. Again, as we go, I want to try to get those fibers to go rearward, so kind of stroking them so they stay back. And just keep wrapping, nice touching wraps so it just looks like the stem is touching itself every time. And once you get to the point where you think you've got enough wraps, I might be pushing it here by one more, but I'll try one more. I'm then gonna come in and secure that again. Secure that down with a couple wraps behind. You're gonna have some rogue feathers out front, or fibers out front, that's fine. Again, do a couple in front. Then we're gonna get a hold of that stem. Be sure you only snip out the stem. I'm gonna go in and trim out these front ones just because I don't really have room to push them back. And then once I'm at this point, I wanna take all those fibers, stroke them rearward a little bit. I'm gonna lay down a good thread base here at the head. So it's okay that you're gonna push those fibers down a little bit, but I want a nice head. I'm gonna cover up all that work that I did. So cover up some of those feathers, trim out anything that you need to, if you have any fibers that are exposed there. And yeah, just build a little bit of a tapered head with your thread. And all we gotta do from here is whip finish it. And that's my version of a soft hackle spey. It's a good one to touch with some head cement as well. So if you're gonna definitely put some head cement on, then I'm only gonna do one whip finish because I know I'm gonna put some UV on and secure it really well. Just make sure you got a good, secure fly up at the head. That's what really matters. If that comes undone, everything else, all the work you've done will just kind of unfold on you. And that, guys, is your soft hackle spey. So again, you can kind of go in there and pull up those feathers or those fibers, pull it up, kind of get a look at it, and then we want to slick that back, making sure that we get equal amounts of fibers on either side of that hook. There we go. Some of those pheasant rump fibers are really long. But all that, once it's slicked back, you kind of get that view that it's just going to dance right behind there. And you can see that those pheasant rump fibers are going to stand out because of that feather that's below it. Kind of spongy, it kind of pops up. When it's wet, it will slick back a bit, but it's still going to hold that profile really nice. How'd it go, guys? That's our soft hackle spey. That's an unweighted version. But you do it, bud? Nice job. Look at that. Like a pro. So you can really, kind of a nice thing with these patterns, especially with just using that chenille, is you can vary up the colors a lot. You could use like a dark green. You could use on this one I tied, I've just got like a lighter coffee color, tan. Any color that you want, you can really vary it up just kind of to the water system that you're in. This is just meant to look like a small streamer. It's not trying to imitate necessarily a mayfly or anything like that. It's quite large. But when you go down to the smaller sizes, it definitely looks more like a bug. But if it's swinging, it still just looks like something's cruised or caught in the current. So just giving them enough attention to hopefully entice them to eat it. Nice, guys. Looks like everybody is pretty well done that one. Getting the Instagram photos there. Oh, sorry, me. Sorry, I thought you were talking about your fly. Great. So that's going to kind of introduce a few of the techniques we're going to use in the next fly. In the next fly, they're on a little bit bigger scale, but it is a little bit tougher at times to work with because we're using on the next one we're going to use a turkey flat, which is we don't commonly use them for anything else, but it's quite a thick stem, so it's a little tougher to tie in. But again, a really kind of similar to that mallard flank. It's going to hold everything up that we put on top of it. Okay, so once you guys have that one wrapped up, I'll get you to go ahead and open that other package. So that other package is going to have, it's going to have a long streamer hook. So what we're going to do with this, I'll show you what the end product looks like here. So we're going to tie a fairly simple intruder. Half of the time, some of the problems that arise is how you actually set up this hook. So you can tie this on a shank. This evening, we're not going to actually use just the straight shank that you can buy, like an intruder shank. We're going to tie it on a streamer hook, just because I wasn't too sure what everybody's vices are. Some vices don't hold those intruder shanks very well. So we're going to tie it on a hook, and I have a good heavy pair of pliers that what we'll do after is we're just going to cut out the hook bend. So it's basically the same thing, only we know this will sit in everybody's vise quite nicely. On this one, you can tell out the back, all I've done is cut that shank out. Works just as well. So just a little bit easier way to be able to set up our hook. So you're going to have your long streamer hook, and you're going to have that stinger hook, and you're going to have a piece of intruder wire. Well, intruder wire. What I use for intruder wire, good old bead wire, much cheaper. So what we're going to start with is that streamer hook. I want you to grab out that stinger hook and that wire. And go ahead and get that streamer hook fixed in your vise. So this, I think most of these were they're like a size 2, they're quite long, 4X long. Doesn't really matter the hook bend size. We're just using something that had a good sturdy shank. That sounded like it went somewhere. There's another one in here. Everybody got shoes on, I hope. Okay, so then go ahead and grab that wire. Cut myself a piece here. And that stinger hook. So there's a couple different ways to tie these in. Some people prefer to only tie in the wire and then you can affix the hook afterwards. Myself, and how I'm going to show you how to do it on this one, that's not what we're going to do. Reason being, if I were to just tie this in, let's say I leave myself this much room, it's a bit of guesswork. When I then go, I'll show you the style of how you can stick that stinger hook on here, but you're not necessarily going to know how far that's going to sit back, and if we left too small a loop, we wouldn't be able to get the hook through. And if I left too big a loop, the hook's going to hang way out the back of the fly. So the way I'm going to show you to tie it in is going to be a lot easier because we're going to set the distance. Problem being, you have to tie the fly with the stinger hook already in it. So watch your hand. That's the only reason people don't do it, because it'll sting you. So go ahead and grab that stinger hook. Okay. So what you kind of want to do is you want to fold your wire in half. You don't have to really pinch this down too much down at the base, but you want to get it so it's going to start to, because that's where your hook's going to sit, is right at the end. Okay, so you want to pinch that down just a smidge. From there, what we're going to do is align both of those ends. Okay. And now when we take that that stinger hook, we want those two to come out. So if you see the bend in that stinger hook, it looks like there's a natural doorway going up. Like there's almost a slot built into it. We want to stick that wire so both of those strands go in and head up that way. Okay. So when you have it, it should look like this. You should have it kind of in and, oop, dropped it. 1 second. Yeah, bud? Oh, good job. Okay, so once you got that in there, sorry guys. What we then need to do is we need to stick that loop that we have in here over top of that hook. So try to show this to you a little easier. I'm going to take that, put it down over top of that hook, make sure it can't get back out, and I'm going to pull it tight. One second here, I'll try to show that to you a little better. Mine came out on me. Once you do it once, you'll realize it. What it looks like. So I just got to make sure that that hook goes through the loop. I'm going to pull that tight. I did that one wrong that time. See, sometimes you gotta try it once or twice to realize when that wire comes out the eye, the direction that you want it to come out, because sometimes it's gonna be hard to get it to sit straight in line on the hook shank. There we go. So what you want is you want that wire, I think I actually told you guys the wrong way when I started. So you want that wire, when it's done, to be coming out so that I could basically hold this and it'd be in a straight line. So we can bend that wire around a little bit, but you want that to be coming out that tip. So that means that on the underside where the actual point of the hook is where that loop finished sitting. Does that make sense? No? Okay, I'll show you again from the start because now I've figured out how to do this properly. So I'll take this right from the start. It actually does matter, so it's kind of, you want to get it right before you ever start sticking it on. Okay, so again from the start, I'm going to fold those two wires together. Now when I'm holding this hook, I hold it like so, okay? Now I want to stick that wire in this side so it's running away from the hook. I can pull a little bit through, and then I'm going to reach down and take that loop and make sure it goes, sorry, I'll get this back in view here, goes over top of that hook and pull. So now you can tell when I pull that wire tight, it's coming out at a straight line right from that hook. If I go the other way, it shoots out at like an angle, which isn't going to sit nicely on that hook shank. That's better? Okay, good. So now once we've got that in place, what I want you to do is go ahead and get your thread started on your hook shank. So come right behind the eye. I want you to lay a nice thread base. You don't have to go all the way back to the bend on this one because we're just not going to use that much of the hook. Okay, so I'm only going to come back here. I'm going to give myself some space in front of that where the point would be. As you see, I actually cut the point of the hook off for myself already just because it's one less thing to stab myself with. So lay a nice thread base down. And we want to come right back up to the eye. Now also in your bag, you're going to notice you had a set of dumbbell eyes. Okay? So nothing fancy here. We're not even trying to make them look like eyes most of the time. It's just used as weight to hold it the right orientation in the water. So we're going to put those dumbbell eyes on the bottom. So I'm going to start by putting it on top, and then I'm going to swing them around to the bottom. Or you can turn your vise upside down, whatever you prefer. So I'll tie them in on top, and then once we've got quite a few securing wraps, then we can spin it around to the bottom. So remember, it's just like tying in a material. We're going to come in kind of sideways. We're going to put one wrap over top of it, maybe two wraps, and then we're going to switch directions. And we can tie these dumbbell eyes right up against that eye. We're not going to put anything in front of them, so we can get them nice and close to the eye. So then I'm just going to alternate. I'm going to do some figure eights, just kind of however you want, going just around the dumbbells. At this point, I've put it about enough thread wraps that I know it's going to be secure, and I'm going to flip it to the bottom side, okay? And then I'm going to put a few more just to make sure it stays there. And if you notice that your eyes are kind of leaning forward on one side or the other, that's the side you want to attack, and just hit it with more thread wraps in front of it, and it'll pull it back rearward again. So once you got it in there, it looks good and secure. I always like to, at this point, go in and touch it with some head cement or some UV. If you do that right now, you know that they're not going to spin on you. So I'm just going to put one right on those thread wraps. Just like that. And now we're going to go ahead and pick up that wire again. Okay, so I took my thread back to where I finished on the hook shank. And so that's where I'm gonna leave it hanging for a second. Now, I want this hook point, everybody kind of has their own preference, and if you talk to especially steelheaders, they all have an opinion on the orientation that they like that hook to sit at. Some guys like it out at the side angle, some guys say they want it on the bottom with the dumbbell eyes. Most of the time we actually tie these on a tube fly. So on a tube fly, this hook just gets sucked in by the line you've tied it to, and then you can just change where you like it if you like it somewhere. For me personally, when I tie it in, I like to tie them up on top. So I want that hook to be pointed up. So if a fish grabs it, it's set on itself, it's gonna be locked in there. Hopefully you've pinched your barb when you're doing it, so when you're fishing, just the shape of this hook really holds the fish on nice, especially in that top lip. So if I go back onto where I know I've laid all those thread wraps down, the amount that I'm gonna use, come back a little farther. This isn't super important how long this back piece is, but you don't need to go all the way into the hook bend because we're gonna cut that off. So what I'm gonna do then is I'm gonna give myself about half of the length of the hook shank that you're using. Okay, so I'll repeat that again, half the length of the hook shank that you're actually using. I'm gonna measure that right from the eye of this to the eye of my other, the shank, and I'm just gonna take that and set it at the back. Okay, what I did again, I measured it off the stinger hook, I put it in the middle of the hook shank, the portion I'm using. I pinched it up by the eye, and all I do is pick that up and I translate that back to where I'm gonna tie it in. Okay, now I'll switch hands. You wanna keep that wire right on top of the hook shank. So I'm gonna take some collecting wraps and start working my way back towards the front of the fly so that orientation stays that way. Okay, I want that hook to stay pointed up. And that's why it's important that it came off that hook in that direction. If it was coming off the other side, the hook would look like it's tipped to one side. So then I'm just gonna continue forward, making sure I'm keeping that wire up on top of the hook. And everybody's kind of got their own methodology here. I'm gonna take it almost right to the dumbbell eyes. I'm gonna leave about, a hook eye gap behind the dumbbell eyes, and I'm gonna take that wire, I'm gonna bend it back over, pinch it down, and go back over it again. So I've doubled that wire back over, okay? That way we know this is not coming off this hook shank ever. And then I'm gonna reach in there and cut out that wire. I can pass around the pliers if you need to cut it. It's not great to, actually I have another set of pliers here, I'll grab two. Just grabbing something. So you can pass those around and just snip out that wire so it's out of the way. Colin, send those this way. Yeah. So at this point, you can, most importantly at the back, you just want to make sure you cover up where you snipped off. And make sure those are good and covered up. You don't want any of that wire exposed. I'm gonna, at this point, go to put some more, again, I'm gonna kind of overkill this, but I'm gonna go back with some UV resin again, and I'm just gonna go right down all those threads. Just a nice light coating. Just again, making sure none of that's gonna move. Once I know that's in a good spot. So guys, a lot of times at least for myself, what I'm gonna do, if I know I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna tie, let's say 12 of these, this is as much as I would do for now. I would whip finish and be done. Set it to the side, and I'll whip out a dozen of them. So all my prep work is done, and then when I come back, so if you're gonna tie lots of these, your proficiency is better and your consistency is better if you do your actual fly tying in one quick piece. So if I do all the work, the feathers I'm gonna put on this, and I just sequentially do that over and over, if every time I have to go and build one of these shanks, it just takes time, kind of separates it up. For me personally, I like to just create a bunch of them and then go back and build the fly itself. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna put on after this is you're gonna have some type of colored crystal diamond braid. So you're gonna have a diamond braid. I think you guys have some in different colors. Some might have a green, some might be a crystal, some might be kind of like a bonefish colored tan. Go ahead and grab that. We'll advance that thread forward, just behind the eyes. Okay, I think everybody's caught up here. So I'm going to take that diamond braid, and this really doesn't need to be diamond braid. It could be as simple as like just some flash that you can wrap up. We've created a base. We don't need a lot of bulk here. The bulk is coming out of the actual feathers we put on. This is more just to add a little bit. If you're thinking it's a bait fish or something like that, there's just going to be a little bit of flash in there. So it'll definitely show up. So we're going to tie that in behind the dumbbell eyes, and we're going to wrap rearward, just securing it down. We'll take it back to where we left our thread wraps. Then we're going to advance our thread forward. This time we're going to leave ourselves some room up at the head, okay? So I'm going to say at least if you had measured those dumbbell eyes, you're going to want to give yourself basically almost 2 of those width of the dumbbell eyes. So I'm giving myself enough room to tie in my other pieces, okay? Okay. Once we kind of got that tied in, all we're going to do, guys, is wrap that up the shank and tie it off where we left our thread, okay? Tie it off, make sure it's good and secure, and then you can snip out the remainder. That's a little bit too much space. And if you come up too close to the eyes, it's okay, because we can just wrap thread back over it as well. It's normally what I end up doing. You crowd the head a little bit, but it's not super critical in this style tying. Now, really, we only have a couple more things to add to this to actually finish off this fly. This one is a very simple. It's normally called a Hobo Spey, is what they call it. If you look at other spey flies, you would notice that back here at the back of the fly, they create another almost like mountain of material like we do at the head. So lots of times it's 2 of them. It almost looks like 2 little squids put together. That's a very kind of common styled intruder. This one is just a single, so we have it up at the head only. Principles being with these intruders that we want to create as much bulk visually as possible with the least amount of material. So the more material you put on them, the heavier they are, the harder they are to cast. You're trying to get water off of them when you're casting them, especially with a 2-handed setup. You really want to get as minimal amount of material on the fly as possible to create as much visually size that you can get out of it, okay? So next thing we're going to put in here, guys, is you're going to have a gray turkey flat. So kind of maybe another feather you've never tied with. So lots of times people will use a schlappen in this for this, what we're going to use this for. I like this. It's just a little bit different feather. They're a little bit coarser. It holds up other materials a little better. It's just a little bit more, has a little bit more strength in those fibers. So for this one, again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep it like I did that pheasant rump. I'm going to take all that fuzz off, okay? So just hold those fibers that are nice and stiff up at the head. You hold those and just pull off the rest of that fluff off the bottom. So you're left with this. Then you're going to go down to that eye, you're going to pinch, and you're going to peel those feathers back again. So here you can tell right up at the head there's some real short ones. We're not going to use those. So we'll tie in just behind them. So when I'm ready to tie in, my feather looks like so. Kind of got that triangle up at the top. That really short stuff I'm not going to use. Paparazzi over there. Yeah, I think so.
Just a bit of a bromance.
Little bromance. Okay, guys. Once we're at this point, now we're going to take that, lay that right in front of that diamond braid, and we're going to tie that in. Okay? You notice with my right hand here, for you, it'll probably be your left hand. I'm just holding this at this angle. I'm holding this feather at this angle because the stem in this is a lot thicker, and when you pull tight wraps on it, it sometimes like to spin that feather, and I want to keep it oriented like that the best I can. So you'll notice it had that same concave shape as those other feathers. We still want those fibers to point rearward down the fly, okay? And once you know that it's good and secure, I'm going to take a few wraps just to make sure. Every time that you're going to wrap a feather, you really got to make sure it's secure because you're actually going to pull on it a little bit. And it might pull that stem out from where you tied it in. Then just go in and trim out the tip that you put in. Just like so. And so you can tell that when I go to wrap those fibers are going to point rearward again. Now at this point, especially with this one, I find with the turkey flats, those fibers like to stick together quite a bit. If you have a comb or a brush of any kind that you work with or some Velcro, it's not even a bad idea just to go and comb those out. It'll be all right just doing it like this as well. So when we go to start wrapping, we want to make sure that we've kind of twisted that so that the fibers are still aligned and they're still heading backwards. As I go, I'm going to grab those feathers, I'm going to pull them backwards. So right at the start, I like to go in, I grab behind them, and I'm just going to put a nice strong pinch on them. Just pinch those fibers down so they really want to go rearward and they're not going to fight me so bad. Okay, so once I pinch those down pretty good, now they've kind of got that little bit more of a natural curve and we're going to really want to head that direction. So from here, I'm just going to take and start doing some wraps. Okay, so right up against that diamond braid, I'm going to start wrapping. Okay, nice close touching wraps because we need to utilize every little bit of space that we have at the head of the fly here. So making sure that you get the stem to be touching and that your wraps are coming nice and close together but staying ahead of the last one. And once you get maybe 3 turns is probably enough, maybe 4, I want you to go ahead in, really secure on this stem. It's a really big stem down at this end, so you want to make sure that you've got it nice and gathered. Get some thread on it in front of it and behind it. And then you can go in and snip that stem out. So that's what we're left with. But if you've done it like I have, you've now wrapped those feathers forward into the space that you need to put the rest of the materials. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to pull them back a little bit, and you can see I've crowded up against those dumbbell eyes pretty good. I'm going to take some thread wraps and I'm going to pull them back, giving myself a little bit of space to work with there. And as you see it really didn't affect that at all. Still holding that nice shape. That turkey flat's going to hold up everything else we put in there. So you want to create yourself at least a dumbbell eyes width behind them to work with, okay? I put in a nice thread base, make sure it looks like so. Do you poke yourself? Oh yeah. Kind of a little trick that I've seen some guys use, and it totally works. But when you're working with any time you got a stinger fly, and if you've already tied it in, if you take the top of an old pencil and you take that little piece of eraser and you just stick it on that hook point, it never grabs your hand. But these hooks, you can tell if you ever stick yourself, they're designed to grab. So if you hit it, it's going to suck into your finger pretty good. Okay, how are we doing, guys? Keeping up? We're making sense? Don't hesitate to slow me down if you need to. Next material, guys, we got strung marabou. Yeah, thank you. This is a good example. So here, just like this, little pencil eraser. I take it and I stab it into that hook. It's not going to bite me anymore. There's just a genie over there. Wish for anything, it'll just show up. Okay, so. Yeah, that's right. Just like I said with that, when I was talking about the mallard flank, marabou is an interesting material. It looks like you got a lot there, but the usable material for you guys, I've picked out the feathers that are good. There's a lot of feathers in here, especially for this fly, that are just not the right piece of marabou. What I'm looking for is something that's very full. It's got to carry its shape right to the tip. So I just pulled out this one. I'm like, beautiful. That's nice and full. It carries its shape all the way out to the tip. I got lots of nice long fibers. This is probably better than any of yours. That's as good as it gets right there. Trades. No trades in fly tying. Okay, so we're gonna prepare this feather a lot like we have the other ones. We're not gonna tear off anything off the stem because we're gonna use quite a bit of this feather. But you can see as you come down the marabou feather, it gets more, there's more fluff in it. It's even longer fibers, which is what we really wanna use. So if we grab up here at the tips, we see that first little bit, it's just short, guys. Not very long. Those ones we're not too interested in. So that's where we're gonna tie in. Now marabou, if you look at it, you're like, well, Tim, I don't know which way to tie that in. It doesn't really look like it shapes anywhere. If you look at the bottom half of it, it doesn't look like it shapes one way or the other. If you come up and look at the tips, you can tell that there is a slight concave in one direction, but it's really not that crucial when we tie in the marabou because it's so malleable, we can make it go where we want to. Okay, so don't worry too much about that. So I'm gonna come in at those tips, just like last time, and I'm gonna pull them down. This time, what is very effective with marabou is if you wet your fingers. So I wet my fingers just a little bit. Those fibers will go where I want them to, so I can stroke them out of the way. After I tie these in, I'll wet my fingers again to pull them rearward, and it'll work even better. So that's what I'm left with. I've got the tips pulled up. Now I'm gonna go ahead, lay that just in front of that turkey flat, and I'm gonna tie it in. Once I got that nice and tied in, and you can tell here, guys, that the stem on this marabou is very thin. If you pull on it or tug on it too hard, it will break. Okay, so it's not like the turkey flat where it's that nice thick stem. This stem is quite thin. So I tied that tip in, and now all of a sudden it's like, where did that tip go? It kind of just blends in, and I normally leave it in there. I don't even cut it out. I'll leave it until I'm finished my wrap. If it looks like it's out of place, then I'll go in and snip it out. But for the most part, I don't even bother taking it out. So now I'm gonna take it, wet my fingers again, and I'm just gonna choose a direction. I want those fibers to go rearward. It works really well if you have like a little glass of water or dip it in your beer. Just get them wet, and then you can pull it and stroke it backwards, okay? Now that I've done that, I'm gonna start taking my wraps. But remember, that stem is thin, so don't put a lot of pressure. But we wanna push those wraps starting right up against that turkey flat. And we basically wanna get as many wraps as we can in up against those dumbbell eyes. Really wanting to utilize some of those longer fibers. So we need to stay in the game long enough with the feather that we at least get to use some of those longer fibers, because that's what's really gonna draw the shape back down over the fly. So it's gonna seem like you're tucking probably more in than you should behind this, but you are gonna be stacking some wraps right on top of each other, but that's okay. So I'm at the point now here where I'm getting right down to the end of the stem. So I'm gonna reach in there, get some thread over top of it. If you trap some fibers, that's okay. We can work at getting those situated. Make sure you pull that stem back and get some wraps in front of it, up by the dumbbell eyes. Then reach in there and trim that stem without trying to cut any other fibers. It can be a little challenging at times. And now if you kind of get in front of your fly, and if you blow some air over top of it, it'll right away show you the shape that you've created. So you're gonna see how that dances. You wanna go in there and get some good thread wraps, making sure you've really pinned down behind that. Black thread on this black fly, you're not gonna see those wraps, it's perfect. And you can see already just at this point that turkey flat's holding that shape out, that marabou's just laying right on top of it. We got that beautiful big shape. And like I said, when you blow some air over top of it, you can just see those fibers dance. And that's exactly what it's gonna look like in the water. Looks good, guys. So the more wraps that you put into that marabou, obviously the more fibers you're gonna have on there. So if you cut yourself short, it's just a little thinner looking fly. This is pretty good what I've done here. I could have maybe gone one wrap less, but that's a good amount. I got enough fiber, not too much. Remembering that marabou is very light and fluffy. So it's not gonna hold water, it doesn't really add weight to the fly. Awesome. We only got one piece to go, guys, and we're done this fly. So in there, you should have had some fibers that are kind of all stuck together. It's called Lady Amherst pheasant tail. So really pretty feather, very overpriced. But if you buy one, it lasts you quite a while. I think I've only maybe ever bought a couple of them. But it's a pheasant tail, so it's a really neat material. You don't really want to waste it tying pheasant tails because it would look cool, but it's too expensive to do that. But just like on a pheasant tail, one side of the feather is super long, and one side of the feather is short. They're both good fibers, but depending on the size of the fly you're tying, in our case, we want the long ones. So the ones I've given you are these longer ones off the back of the feather. Reason that we're adding this in, we're gonna you should only have 3 or 4. We don't put much. Again, we just want it to be a sparse fly. But what it does is if we've got the right length, they're gonna hang in there. They're barred in color, so it'll change the way it looks, the way it dances in the water. You're gonna have those few other fibers that lay out there on top of the marabou and just add a nice variety to the fly. So I'm gonna take a few off the top of this stem as well. And how you tie them in is literally one at a time. So if you separate those fibers down, and if you don't have enough fibers, guys, feel free to come grab some more here. I think I gave you all enough, but then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take it and I'm gonna lay it on there, and I can see that's gonna extend just a little further than that marabou, and that's perfect. That's what I want. I want it to be right about there. Then I'm gonna switch hands. I'm gonna grab onto that fiber where I had it. I'm just gonna lay it right on top, get one gathering wrap over it, and maybe 2, tighten down. Now it's in, okay? And now all you're gonna do is periodically space those out. So if you've got 3 or 4 or however many you have, you're just gonna space them around that fly. So the next one I grab, I'm gonna go over and I'm gonna go maybe a quarter of the way around the fly over here. And I'll stick in the next one. And I'll just keep spinning it. Add in the next one. And if you have more, like if you have lots of them, it doesn't hurt. I mean, they're not gonna add up that fast and create that much bulk to the fly, but you really don't need to put that much in. You're just trying to get a little bit different color on the fly, adding a little bit of length to a few of the fibers. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll take like a cheap grizzly hackle and we'll peel all of the feathers off the stem except for right at the tip, and we would call it a flag, and you would hang that flag way off the back and it would flutter at a little bit different length beyond everything else. Lots of things you can use. I like the Lady Amherst just because it's already got a barred color to it. It just looks really good on this fly. And once we've got all those put in, we're gonna do a few more wraps just to make sure everything's secure. Trim anything that you don't like sticking out. I'm probably then, if you're like me, you might have laid some of those fibers out across those dumbbell eyes, so I'm gonna come in front of the dumbbell eyes and make a few wraps as well. And that's where I'm gonna whip finish. I'm gonna whip finish in front of the dumbbell eyes, but behind the hook eye. Do a couple whip finishes. Gonna put some head cement on there, make sure it doesn't go anywhere. You can snip your thread out. I always like to go in there and grab those fibers and push them rearward and just see where they're all gonna end up lining up. Kind of gives you a good shape. And touch it with some head cement. I gotta say, the more and more I tie, I've kind of tried most head cements. I used to be die-hard Sally Hansen's, hard as nails, like that's all I use for everything. It's good, but it leaves a pretty strong odor. There's some other negatives to it. Everybody kind of has their own. I've really liked both Loon and Solarez make them now. This one specifically is Solarez. It's called Bone Dry. It's super thin. It goes on just like head cement because most UV is quite thick, whereas this will absorb into a fly just like Sally Hansen's would. Super thin. I like the way it grabs into things, and then you know when you UV it, it's secure, it's dried instantly. You don't have to wonder when it's gonna dry. You don't have to hang it up to dry, you can stick it in your box right away. That's my little plug on what I like for UV these days. Yeah, because my wife steals all my Sally Hansen's. So once you've got that to where you like it, yeah, get a little breeze over it, see where it's going. That's it, guys. Remove your eraser and you're ready to fish, almost. So what I'm gonna do at this point, and I'll pass around those pliers again. So all I'm gonna do is go in at that hook bend. Where do those pliers end up? If you send them back to me for a sec. Thanks, Peter. So I'm just gonna go in, kind of pull the material back out of the way. I'm gonna go in just basically right about where I stopped with that diamond braid. Make sure I don't cut my wire. Try to listen for where that nice sharp hook point went. And that's it. That's it, guys. That's our intruder fly right there. Very basic intruder, still very effective. Lots of movement in the water. Doesn't seem like we fish a ton of them in this area, but I don't know why we don't. Especially this one's just gonna look like a leech. A little bit of flash in it. I'll pass these pliers around. Try to keep an ear on where that piece goes, or kind of use it, corral your hand on it. Okay, guys, that is our Hobo Spey. Pretty cool fly. I really like that soft hackle we started with too. A great pattern. Give it a try. It's kind of unconventional for a streamer pattern for most people what they would try. Don't hesitate. Give it a go. Do we have any questions, guys, before we wrap up tonight? Clear as mud. You guys are more than welcome to hang out a little longer, finish up that other fly, the other material. For you guys at home, I think this is where we'll leave you. Thanks again for tuning in. Again, this is Tim here at Fly Fishing Bow River Outfitters. If you head on over to our website, you can see every week we post up the recipe for what the next week is. So if you can't be here and meet us, then you can go online, get the recipe, and be ready to watch along and tie. Yeah, pretty cool. There's lots. Every week we cache our on YouTube. We'll take this episode, we'll cache it on there as well as it's on Facebook, so you can tune in again if you want to try this at home and you need some instruction again. Yeah, other than that, I think I'll let you guys go for the night. Thanks for tuning in again for Thursday Night Live. We'll see you guys next week. Thanks, guys. Come here, bud.